Good afternoon and welcome to the October meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee meeting. We'll get right on the agenda by starting with apologies for absence. I haven't received any, but Wendy, have you received any, please?
No apologies received, Chair.
Okay. In that case, let's move on to declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest to be notified, please? I'm not seeing any, so we'll record that as nil. And we will then move on to the public open forum element of the meeting. As a reminder, members of the public wishing to participate in the meeting are required to notify their intention in advance. No such notifications have been received, and therefore we can proceed with the rest of the agenda. And we do so by moving to item 4, the action list. If we take the actions in turn, but before doing so, just to say thank you, Wendy, for reformatting the action list. I think it's much better. We just need to encourage the action owners to update you as to when the actions are expected to be completed, are to be completed by. We start with action 1, actions with Richard Jones, Performance Manager, Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, and that's in relation to providing Audit Committee members with a list of key collaborations and who audits. Could we have an update, please?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insight Manager for the Council. We've, since the last report, continued to collate the arrangements for key collaborations. We are now at the point where we've literally just concluded a first draft of that, which we'll be sharing internally with key colleagues such as internal audit and members of the strategic leadership team to further refine the information on those arrangements, and then subject to that we'll be looking to add it to your forward work planner. Just to add, I think as we mentioned last time, the Council is involved in a lot of collaborative arrangements. We're trying to make sure that these are focused in line with your action there on the key collaborations, so you can focus your time accordingly on those of most significance. So that we're at the second stage now of just refining that down, and we'll add it to your work programme for future meeting.
Thank you, Richard. I'd be quite keen if you could specify an action when you expect this to be closed by, please.
Okay, just looking at your future work planner and the meetings coming up, I would say we can probably have it for your December meeting, if you've got a meeting in December. Fantastic,
thank you. Great, let's move on to the second action. That's with Andy Woffin and myself, Andy Woffin, Chief Internal Auditor. That's in respect of cross-referencing reports with the terms of reference. So, Andy, any update, please?
Thank you, Chair. We've got a meeting in the diary for next week with yourself, me and Peter to work through the terms of reference for Governance and Audit Committee. And then once we've confirmed that, I'll make sure that the reports forthcoming onto the work programme are in line with the terms and conditions, and that'll take us through to 31st of March 2023, so it will be ongoing until March 2023.
Thank you. If you could note that, please, Wendy. The third action on our list is in respect to the internal audit outturn report. We have this item on the agenda for today's meeting, so I suggest we can close the first element of this action. But if we turn our attention to the second element, which is the provision of fraud figures, Andy, are you in a position to update us in terms of where you are with that, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, that's been collated. I've double-checked with Peter to make sure we're okay to send them out. I just need to put a bit more of an explanation around that. It does relate to the COVID-related frauds which we had, and that'll be sent out early next week.
Thank you once again. The next action is in respect of reformatting this action list. Self-evidently has been completed, so yet again, thank you, Wendy. We'll mark that as closed. The next action is with Jonathan Davis, Head of Finance, and Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, and that's in respect of amending a final version of a Statement of Accounts. I'm assuming that we are going to keep that element of the action open, but could I just ask John to confirm, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair. that has been completed in the background within the accounts document itself, but I guess won't be finalised as such until those accounts come back to this committee, which is scheduled for the 24th of November. So I'd probably suggest that it's kept open until that date.
Thank you, that makes sense. If you could note that, please, Wendy. And the second element of this action is in respect of funding from the Welsh Government in respect of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit scheme. Any update on that, please? Peter.
Chair, I will come clean, and that's an oversight on my part, but I will address that imminently and get a response back in by the end of the week.
Thank you. So keep that action open, please. The next action is in respect of the Audit Wales quarterly update and timetable. Action sits with Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insights Manager. And that's about adding the Audit Wales Assurance and Risk Assessment Report to the Forward Work Programme. And I believe that's on our agenda for later, so we can mark that as complete. Thank you. The next one is in respect of the Audit Wales Springing Forward report. And the actions are with myself and officers in respect of the arrangements for people strategy and asset strategy. As Andy Woffin's already indicated, I have a meeting with Andy and Peter Davis next week, so I suggest we pick it up at that point. So for the time being, keep that element of the action open. In a similar way, the second element, I suggest we keep that open. I'll try to cover that at the same meeting. And then thirdly, in respect of update and completion date of corporate and community plan, maybe I just look to Richard initially in terms of where we are with that, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So the Community and Corporate Plan is on the agenda for Cabinet next week, and subsequent to that, it's also on the work plan to come to Council on the 27th of October. The plan sets an initial direction, and we further developed alongside the development of the Council's new medium-term financial plan, and then a fuller Community and Corporate Plan will be published early in 2023 alongside the budget set by the new council.
Thank you, Richard. If we could just note those dates, Wendy, thank you. The next actions in respect of the whole authority strategic risk assessment. We had a good discussion at our last meeting. A number of proposed actions came out of that discussion. And just to reiterate, Richard, if you want any support in terms of, one, understanding those actions, how I can contribute to helping you close those out, I'm very open to a chat as and when. But I would be quite keen if we could, subject to that conversation, sort of look to close this action by the end of this calendar year, if possible. Would that be acceptable?
Yes, thanks, Jane. Thanks for you and the committee's comments last time. We'll review how we present the risk register to you in line with those, and we'll share an early draft with yourself, if that's okay, for feedback on that. If it's okay to pick up just quickly on, I think, action 3 of that action around the housing risk, which was raised by a member of the committee. We did refer that back to the risk owner, who's reviewed it, and the risk should have been and has been assessed as high. So that's now been amended on the risk register.
Thank you for that update. And then the final action is more, in my view, more of an aspiration in terms of trying to scheduling these meetings closer to quarter ends. On reflection, I think we should note that as an aspiration, but for expediency, I suggest we close this action. And then look to address it as best we can. Thank you. Okay. The next item, item 5 on the agenda, is the Anti-Pribery Risk Assessment. I understand this item is being introduced by Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, with support from Andy Woffin, Chief Internal Auditor. So, Peter and Andy, assume we've read the paper. Thank you, it's very clear, but please sort of maybe pull out key areas of note. Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and yeah, I'll take your lead there, just in terms of not needing to necessarily go through the report slash presentation page by page. So just to frame things for the committee, and just obviously understanding, I guess, new members of the committee who won't understand the history of what takes us to this document being received by the Governance and Audit Committee. So there was a recommendation made as a consequence of previous limited audit opinion when reviewing our arrangements for anti-bribery, fraud and corruption. That recommendation required an annual risk assessment to be brought to the committee. That is what we are doing here today. And I'll maybe just sort of give you some sort of context before I get into the thrust of the report, and to sort of allow you, Chair, to sort of hand it out, open it out for questions. So first off, just in terms of what the paper aims to do, it gives you that brief background in terms of our policy, and I think you can hopefully understand on page 4 as to why, well, matters of anti-fraud, bribery and corruption are important at the best of times, but if you just think about the size and scale of the organisation and the amount of funds that flow through it, the level of interactions it has, you know, it's of utmost importance, really, that we have suitably robust arrangements in place. We do have an anti-fraud, bribery and corruption policy statement that's been previously approved by Cabinet in June 2017. The Chair was right to highlight in our pre-meet that we had that that was marked as requiring a review every 3 years. I think consequential to probably many things during the period of the pandemic, where priorities required us to divert our resources to obviously where they needed to be. But I think it's a recognised point that the policy statement needs to be updated, you know, and we will look to plan to do that before the end of this financial year. Furthermore, a bit of history, I guess. So as page 5 talks to, I think it's hopefully helpful to you all, the sort of chronology of events. We initially, and as a consequence of a piece of internal audit work, there was an internal audit review into our arrangements back in 2017. We received a limited opinion on that. And clearly and rightly, we responded to that with, as I said, the policy statement being brought through. Subsequent to that, and I think as you're accustomed to now, with a limited audit opinion, there is by default a follow-up audit, and that follow-up audit brought forward a second limited assurance opinion, which is not what we like to see, and consequently, I think, if my memory serves me correctly, one of the recommendations for myself as the then chief officer to be designated the lead and senior officer responsible for such matters of anti-fraud, bribery and corruption. So clearly we made some immediate steps at that point then, obviously, to improve the arrangements that we have in place. And that led us through to the follow-up audit then in September 2019, moving us out of that limited assurance scope and into one where controls are deemed to be operating satisfactorily. We then brought the first annual risk assessment through in 2019, again through Audit Committee as it was then. And we've had subsequent follow-up audits, both in 2019 and a further one in 2022, earlier in the year, I think, Andrew. Yeah. All of which have confirmed reasonable assurance. I've worked with Andrew in terms of the scope of those audits, those subsequent audits, because I think whilst the early audits rightly were identifying as to whether the expected controls were in place, as I'm sure you'll understand as a Governance and Audit Committee, we need to be practicing, the practice needs to demonstrate that, we are abiding by the policy. And so the focus of the audit in terms of some of the sampling work that was done in the latter follow-ups, obviously look to follow that through and equally to give me, as much as yourselves as the committee, comfort. And it's good to see that that has been the case, but clearly we can't be complacent, particularly with this agenda. I think we recognise, I think both myself and Andrew, that there's still further work to be done. But if I just go on just in terms of overview, I think Andrew already talked on the action list just in terms of those COVID frauds. But arguably, we've seen pretty low levels of fraud elsewhere through the work of the internal audit team and elsewhere, where we've been sort of informed and notified and investigated particular cases. So that's good, but again, not a case of being complacent. And I think as the report then goes on, it sort of touches on where those areas of risks would traditionally manifest in an organisation such as ours, and where, akin to, I guess, the original recommendations that came out of the limited audit opinion, making sure that the arrangements in and around our procurement activity, training and induction, etc., that they were suitably robust. And there was a very clear awareness in terms of staff needing to ensure that they had the awareness, I guess, of some of those associated risks. In terms of mitigation of risks, I've already highlighted, and I will continue to speak with Andrew. And I think we recognise already there's challenges in terms of the capacity with the internal audit team, but it is a risk-based approach taken to the annual internal audit plan. But I will probably want to continue with the levels of follow-up work to make sure that we are always, on the ball in terms of our arrangements. And clearly we'll act on any recommendations that come through as a part of that. I think there's a bit that I might just draw Andrew into just for a brief moment, just in terms of some of the enhancements I think we can make, because we do have access now to SIPFA's fraud and corruption tracker report and some of the data analysis. And I think through discussion, Andrew, you can comment for yourself, but I think that will probably help direct some of our focus in the forward period. I don't know if you want to comment yourself.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, it's something we haven't done in the past, but we will pick that up as part of our internal audit work, is to review the SIPFA report, to see where the key frauds are being undertaken across local government, across the whole of the UK, and then see what risk impact that has on Monmouthshire and what mitigation we have in place. So hopefully we'll come back to you in due course, probably towards the end of this financial year, beginning of the next financial year, with some assurance that we're in a good place in Monmouthshire.
So, Chair, I'm not intent on obviously stepping away through the latter part of the report and outlining where some of those key issues and risks and mitigating action are. But I'm certainly happy to take feedback from yourself, Chair, and the committee and respond to any questions.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Andy. Okay, so very helpful and informative voiceover. So questions and comments, please, members. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Peter, thanks. It's really helpful. And yes, recognising that 5 years is a long time and the world moves on and cyber criminals are not standing still. There was all sorts of cyber crime which we need to recognise, including phishing, and the new one that came across me is smishing, which is phishing by text rather than, and that's a new one on me, but I'm learning all this all the time. I understand exactly what you're saying about having the processes in place and then make sure that staff follow them. So that's sort of the second step is really important. So I see reference in here to training. I can't tell from this paper whether it's mandatory training for all staff. I hear you mention induction, but of course some people were inducted 20 and 30 years ago, so it needs to be some sort of updating refresher on that. And I wonder if we got any, what do we do about raising the profile of this? Do we have like a whistleblowing hotline, and how is that promoted? And all those kind of issues, how do we get people being proactive about spotting these things? Thank you.
So tackle them slightly in reverse. So just in terms of the whistleblowing policy, we have a whistleblowing policy, and that is communicated to staff as part of induction in any event. I think secondly, to the point of training, I think that's a work in progress. I think that's an accepted point, as is, and to your point, the degree to which it is made mandatory. So the Chief Officer for People and Governance, Matt Phillips, he is currently working with teams in People Services to bring forward and through a new learning management system for the Council. And what that will take us into a position of is for each individual role within the Council to understand the levels of training need for each individual role, and the levels of mandatory training that apply. I think there is there is a degree of awareness, I think, for broad awareness for the wider workforce, but there's probably a more targeted piece of training for staff in very particular areas. And I know, Andrew, that has been your intent really, in terms of training that you've already designed, I believe, and tested out with the internal audit team. I don't know if you want to comment.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Yeah, it is in draft. It came through to the former audit committee as well as a presentation in terms of what to raise awareness. We rolled it out to the audit team. Procurement were involved. It needs to be rolled out further. It needs to be further refined, and then rolled out to, as Pete said, all relevant people within the organisation. When we pushed the policy through the former audit committee, we also put it on made it available on our intranet. So there's an awareness there, and it was on the home page for a while, just to kind of raise awareness. We've got our own internal audit page within our intranet, and I'll make sure that is on there as well. So there's links at various points within the organisation, and obviously we've got the whistleblowing policy as well, which indicates if anybody has any concerns, who they can report them to, which includes Peter, and I think it includes me.
And then finally, I guess just touching on your point in terms of cyber risk, something that features within our strategic risk register. I know that the committee's obviously seen sight of that recently. And I know through discussion with yourself, Chair, there will be a point, I'm sure, in the forward work programme where, as was the case last year, the committee wanted to get its assurances just in terms of how it was managing cyber risk. When we've got good and robust arrangements in place, and I'm very happy to share a link to the committee if they want to see sight of that previous report. I still think it's relevant. It was in pink paper, confidential for very clear and obvious reasons, because clearly we don't want to disclose the nature of our arrangements to the outside world. But I'd happily, Chair, provide a link to that, and again, the committee can deliberate through you, Chair, on when they might want to consider that further and again.
Thank you, Martin. Follow-up question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. That's really, really helpful. And I think I should make it clear that I'm not necessarily saying that all staff should be mandated to do fraud awareness training, but I'd like to see some sort of an understanding of a risk assessment of those involved in grant giving and procurement and finance are probably mandated to do it, and the others have a more of a high-level understanding of what's going on here. Thanks.
And sorry, just a valid point. What we're trying to do at the minute, we're going through an evolution, I guess, just in terms of our induction process. I think it's been an issue in itself in terms of talk about mandation. The basics of any individual joining the council, and them being inducted. and I know, Andrew, because you and or your team have been involved in contributing in terms of that fraud awareness as part of the induction. I think there are smarter ways for us to be able to do that. So rather than sitting a new starter physically in a room for an entire day and then just bombarding them, we work in a digital age. We certainly now, post-pandemic, do. So, I think there are some smart ways just in terms of being able to give new starters just access into some of that awareness training remotely. So, yeah, I think that's something we will probably pursue in and alongside the learning management system that I've talked to.
Thank you. Colin, please.
Yes, thanks, Peter. I was going to ask, is there any facility for, or does it occur, any enhanced vetting of key staff for these processes that perhaps were involved in, procurement or that sort of area?
Yeah, so I guess from a safeguarding perspective, in terms of the disclosure barring service, DBS checks and the like, which I'm sure you'll be sort of familiar with anyway, but all of that's in place. But again, in terms of the vetting and the checking, in terms of criminal activity, I guess, Andrew.
There's nothing formal that we go through in terms of those sort of checks.
No financial vetting?
No.
I was thinking, in terms of, unexplained wealth or unmanageable debt, which is something that I have to undertake. So.
Yeah, maybe something I'll take up offline with you if that's okay, just to sort of work that one through to a point. But to Andrew's point, I don't think it's something that we do currently. I guess we probably just need to weigh up and assess that against the levels of associated risk, and as to whether it needs to be introduced into that front end process or not.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to say was around procurement. I understand that we've outsourced some of that now to Cardiff City Council, and procurement, I think, as Martin suggested, is held to be one of the major fraud areas. What the benefit or impact or of that is.
So this is a very broad statement, but the reason that we made that commitment was because we needed to bring in additional capacity and expertise. I think Cardiff, through their, I think it was called Atabian, which is their procurement arm, it's a standalone company, but for good reason. They have very good reputation. It's a good collaboration. I think other councils within the region, South East Wales region, are also exploring as to whether they wish to follow suit in the same way. But I think it gives us both capacity, capability, and expertise, enhanced capacity and capability and expertise, which can only be a good thing, really, when we're talking about that procurement risk.
Okay, and do we have any scrutiny of that?
I believe the procurement strategy has come through the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee in recent months, I think, from memory. I'll be able to follow that through, and by all means, for the committee, if you want to get a line of sight on that, I can share that. That's not a problem.
That's right. Thanks.
Chair, and in addition to that, part of what my team does when we go out and we do audits, we check to make sure there's compliance with the council's policies and procedures, one of which will be the contract procedure rules. So if there is any procurement in the service areas, the team are checking to make sure that that particular policy, both our financial regs and the contract procedure rules, are being followed at a service level.
Thank you. Ian Chandler, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a question, really. It's obviously the policy itself is written as a policy. Some of the things there, section 3.5 about the process of how you raise concerns, obviously is fine. I just wonder, in terms of, though, a more user-friendly, so this is a policy, but is almost like a user guide to raising concerns, and within that, a sort of almost like a triage system of actually trying to work out, is there a concern or not, or is it just a rumor, or is there an allegation? And then linked to that, as you said in section 4.25. This is primarily intended at internal processes, But obviously, you know, as councillors, we hear lots of rumours and innuendos from members of the public. And so what's the route for members of the public in terms of being able to raise concerns and allegations, and how will they be dealt with? You know, and as I said, going back to is that type of triage system to see whether it is something that is worth taking forward or not, because it's quite a blunt instrument in many ways, it appears. So I'm just really about the usability of this as a policy is what I'm concerned about. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chad. I'll take maybe the first element and then I'll hand over to Andrew in terms of the second element. So I think it's a point well made on the first element, and I think to my earlier comment in terms of certainly by the end of this financial year, as looking to review and update the policy, I think there's probably rightly a need to your point to develop something simple and engaging by way of whether a guidance note in its simple form that allows people to just go through that sort of process that you suggest. I think it's a good point made. So we'll capture that and we'll incorporate that into the work that we'll do now in and around the policy development and review. Andrew?
Thanks. Yeah, I think very valid points there, Councillor. In terms of the reporting process, there are a number of ways which those allegations come into the organisation. They generally feed their way to me, and then we need to undertake an assessment. It's very easy to make an allegation, but very difficult to prove, because it needs to be basically, you have to have some substance to pursue it, and can be quite time consuming. And if we feel it's appropriate, then I will have a discussion with Pete to refer it directly to the police. But if it's internal, then we will investigate to the best of our ability. We've got the whistleblowing policy, as Peter's just mentioned. There's almost like an unwritten expectation amongst members that if they have any concerns of potential fraud, corruption, bribery, then that filters through to me. That's probably not as well known for new members, so that's something we probably need to address and make sure that to raise awareness more so, to make sure everybody's up to speed with the proper process and procedures of how they can filter their concerns through to it being investigated or it being decided as a non-issue.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised, so let me try to conclude. So thank you, Peter, thank you, Andy, for a helpful voiceover plus the answers to members' questions. I think we can summarise this item by saying we've considered the Council's approach to anti-bribery, fraud and corruption. We've made some comments, but that doesn't detract from the fact that we share the officer's view that the overall arrangements appear to be effective. We note the relatively low level of incidents of fraud, and for me, I just echo Peter's comments around we cannot be complacent, especially bearing in mind the new and emerging threats, especially in the cyberspace. So yet again, eternal vigilance in this area it continues to be important. But so thank you. Let's then move on to item 6. Item 6 is the Audit Wales Assurance and Risk Assessment Review and Management Response. It's in two parts. Firstly, a paper from Audit Wales setting out the results and conclusions from their assurance and risk assessment work, followed by the Council's proposed management response. So we're being asked to review the paper from Audit Wales and seek assurances that the Council's response is generally adequate and, where appropriate, to refer any material issues to the relevant committee. So first up, we have Charlotte Owen from Audit Wales talk us through the report, and then I think we have Matthew Gatehouse to outline the proposed actions. So in the first instance, over to you, Charlotte.
So this report summarises the findings of some short pieces of work that we did as part of our assurance and risk assessment review, looking at the Council's financial position, how it's responding to the requirements of the Local Government and Elections Act, and also its carbon reduction plans. I'll just quickly run through some of the headline messages from each of those 3 sections before I hand over to Matthew, who will take you through the Council's response. Excuse me. So in terms of financial position, we found that the Council was in a stronger financial position than in previous years, helped in part by the additional funding received from Welsh Government over the last few years. but current economic uncertainty will make financial planning and resilience more challenging over the medium term. I think it's probably worth clarifying that this piece of work looked back at the Council's position at the end of the last financial year, so at the end of March 2022. Obviously, over the last 6 months, a lot has changed in the economic climate. So, many of the numbers that are reported in there will have changed. In particular, the forecast overspends for the current year. Also, there'll be an impact on the medium-term forecast budget gap as well, given the impact of rising inflation and interest rates. But the underlying messages in the report are still valid. So, for example, the need to develop a long-term approach to savings plans so that forecast funding gaps can be closed in a planned and sustainable way, and also being able to manage cost pressures and overspends in year in a sustainable way as well. Then moving on to the implications of the Local Government and Elections Act. We found that the Council's putting in place arrangements to assure itself that it's meeting those requirements. We were assured that the Council understands what it needs to do and that it's making the necessary changes. Some of those changes have already taken place, with others there's work ongoing to prepare for those, for example, the peer assessment panel. But overall, we had no concerns about how the Council was responding to the Act. Then the final section is on carbon reduction planning. Audit Wales published a national report over the summer on how the public sector is sort of making itself ready for net zero carbon. And to complement that work, we did some small local reviews at each council to look at their arrangements for developing and delivering their own decarbonisation plans. So at Monmouthshire, we found that the council has set a clear ambition for decarbonisation, and it's developed a set of actions to help it achieve this. But we found that further work was needed to fully understand both the carbon impact and the cost of those actions, so that the council can prioritise those actions that will have the greatest returns. So we've included a few recommendations in the report that the council undertakes some further work to better understand its current carbon footprint and also the carbon and financial impact of its proposed actions to reach net zero. That will help support decision making, feed into financial planning, make that more accurate, and it will also help the council to develop a set of measures against which they can report on progress. I think that Matthew was going to run through the council's management response to that, including those the recommendations. It's probably worth setting out just for a little bit of context that those areas for development apply to pretty much every public body in Wales. Certainly most councils are receiving very similar recommendations. They're probably more challenging than they initially look. It's a very new area. I spoke to our central team around those recommendations and any examples of good practice, but at the moment it's such early days that there's nothing out there to share. But obviously we'll continue to track what the council is doing in response to this, and it's an area of work that we're going to be coming back to over the next few years as well. But I think that's everything that that's just going to be, I think Richard is going to talk to this. Thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte, for introducing the report, and thank you for your colleagues' work. Three very important areas of the council's work at the moment, and it's helpful to have your assurance and risk assessment review and feedback on them. The management response before you focuses particularly on the recommendations made in the report, which, as Charlotte said, are all focused around our carbon reduction planning. The report and the recommendations we shared with those responsible and sets out how they're looking to address the findings from Audit Wales. As part of that, as Charlotte's already said, we've also considered the national report produced by Audit Wales on carbon reduction, and a great tool for Charlotte following up with colleagues for any other examples we can learn from in how we address these recommendations, and also the commitment from Charlotte and Audit Wales colleagues to continue to work with us to help us progress as well. So that's the report. The management response sets out the responses accordingly from the responsibility holders chair, and hopefully that's clear for the committee.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Thank you, Charlotte. Questions and comments on what you've heard, please. Ian.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for this. And it's for both for the report and for the management response. couple of questions, really, I suppose, or comments. In terms of the management response on the recommendations in relation to the net zero strategy, I accept them, in terms of that there is a process, and particularly in terms of looking at the assessment of carbon footprint, because I can fully understand the complexities of that and the need for a common approach to develop that. I suppose a little bit is my questions and slight concern is that a lot of the other bits have been put into the new community and corporate plan being developed, and July 23 as a completion date for that, which is fine. It's the process before then, I suppose, I'm a little bit more concerned with. Obviously, we've got the interim community and corporate plan coming to Cabinet next week, and how much of this is being incorporated. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but is being incorporated into that interim plan, as well as what are we then going to further develop in terms of the longer corporate plan and medium-term financial strategy. So that was sort of the questions around there. I've got a second set of questions, really, which is, I know that the management response is only in terms of the formal recommendations, but some of the comments about from Audit Wales about the medium-term financial strategy weren't as much recommendations, but they were talking about the council is committed to this. I just wondered whether it would be worth council sort of responding to those comments about, for example, the unsustainability of using vacancy rates as a means of budget recovery, and what the council might want to say about that as well. That's a slightly separate question. Thank you.
If it's okay, Chair, on the comments around the community corporate plan, I am now going to hand over to Matthew Gatehouse, who's been integral in writing it. So we're doing a bit of both. So Matthew from the committee.
Yeah, thanks, Richard, and Councillor Chandler, thanks for the comments. So yeah, just to confirm, I guess you're aware, Councillor Chandler, but for the benefit of anyone tuning in at home, as Richard has alluded to, we've got the new community and corporate plan produced by Cabinet going through to Cabinet next week, following which it will go through to Council. The initial plan is quite light touch. The Cabinet have been keen to stress that what they're currently doing is setting out an adjustment to direction within the budget set by the previous council. There's also a lot of work going on behind the scenes. As you'll be aware, Councillor Chandler, I know that you were involved in the working group that led to some of the initial development into that community and corporate plan. And I think what we have to stress is there's an awful lot of ideas, contributions that still need to be worked through that will find their way into that final version of the plan, which will be aligned with the budget, which is set by the new council. So there's a significant amount of work that will be undertaken on that to ensure that the community and corporate plan stretches the ambition of what Cabinet have said to be one of probably the two overriding priorities of the new council around poverty and inequality and decarbonisation and climate change. So yeah, that work will continue to be developed leading into the corporate plan, and then that will be aligned with any resetting, which will need to any resetting of the sort of climate and nature emergency strategy that will need to follow to ensure that the commitments set there are embedded then in further actions.
Ian, are you content with that answer?
Yeah, in terms of the bits around the climate reduction, the carbon reduction strategy, yes, I'm content with that, as I expected. I suppose then, the other part of my question was more about the medium-term financial strategy, and I know there is not a formal management response because there were no specific recommendations, but comment perhaps on some of those elements that were in the report, I suppose. Or confirmation, perhaps, of some of those comments that might be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Chandler. I'm just going to briefly hand across to to Charlotte just for a second, but just to sort of validate my comment, really. But it may well not be the case that there's not a management response explicitly to the points raised around the development of the medium-term financial strategy and plan here and within the assurance, the report that we've got from Audit Wales. But Charlotte, obviously the financial sustainability reviews that Audit Wales has conducted and for the Council, we have separately responded to the recommendations therein and provided management response, which in fact does confirm that we will look to develop and respond to those points of ensuring that we have both a plan and a strategy that sees us through the medium term and in a sustainable fashion. But Charlotte, do you just want to confirm that fact? And of course we can circulate that on separately if needs be.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Peter. So we didn't include any further recommendations around sort of financial position or medium-term financial planning in this report because there's two sort of outstanding proposals for improvement in our previous financial sustainability report, which is still open. And I think those are on a later paper on today's agenda. So they related to a more sustainable savings planning, as we just spoke about. And we didn't include it because our conversations with officers sort of assured us that that is in progress. So this is from last year. We were told that once the new council was in place and developing the new medium-term financial plan, that there would be a more long-term approach to savings planning involved in that. So we will be reviewing what the council has done in response to that, but obviously that process is sort of underway at the moment. So as the new budget is set and the new medium-term financial plan goes through that process, at the end of this current financial year, we will review what the council has done and if it has adequately addressed those recommendations that we proposed last year.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments from members? Martin, please.
Can I, excuse me, can I just pick up one point? We talked in here about developing the carbon footprint, and I think that's really important to understand that baseline. The one challenge I'd put to a number of organisations who have seen working from home change significantly is where do we draw the boundary of our carbon footprint? If we've got hundreds, if not thousands of staff working at home using inefficient gas guzzling boilers, are we counting that or not? And because that's vital. If that's our strategy is to not have staff in a building anymore, we need to make sure we count them some other way.
I'm not sure who's going to answer that question, but please.
Good afternoon. In terms of our carbon baseline assessment, we have to respond to a standard approach that all of the public sector are required to in terms of WG. It's fair to say that they're still working on the matrix that we respond to. So we certainly account for commuting. That forms part of our carbon assessment. There has been a discussion with WG this year in terms of how we factor in working from home, but at this moment in time, it's fair to say that the matrix is not sufficiently well developed yet to include that level of detail.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure it's an issue for Monmouthshire to solve by itself, but certainly Audit Wales and Welsh Government should be at the forefront of looking at that. Thank you.
Okay, just following up on that point in respect of the action to complete the carbon footprint data baseline assessment and present to full council. We have a due date of December 2022, only a few months away. I'd appreciate a view in terms of our confidence in meeting that timeline, please, from someone.
So we actually submitted last year's carbon baseline assessment into WG in September of this year, and we're intending to go into full council in December to provide an update on what those figures have shown for last year.
Okay, thank you. That's a positive. Just I'll check again with members. Any final questions or comments before we move on? No? Okay. So Thank you. So to try to summarise this item then, I think we can safely say, but please correct me, after due consideration, the committee views the council's management responses appear to be generally adequate at this point in time. But I think we should note the significant financial challenges facing the council, which may impact the timetable for completing some of these actions, especially in relation to those actions which are further out. Is everyone content with that summary? Yep, okay, good, let's move on. We'll move on to item 7, which is the annual grants report. So this paper sets out the results of the Audit Wales certification work in respect of 5 grant returns. The committee is being asked to review this report, note its conclusions, and take a view as to whether the issues raised are material. The item will be introduced by Rachel Freitag from Audit Wales. So please, over to you, Rachel.
That's great. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. So this report summarises the key findings of our work on the grant claims and returns for 2021 financial year. This work usually takes place in the autumn, following on from the main accounts work. There was some delay in completing the work this year relating to the housing benefit subsidy. This was due to finding a number of issues that needed to be worked through to their conclusion, and also some general delays and backlogs, I suppose, coming off the back of the pandemic. Everyone's playing catch up to a certain extent. So I think I'd firstly like to just take the opportunity to thank officers for working with us to help deliver the work and get it over the line. It's much appreciated. So we certified 3 grants totaling around £19 million, which were the housing benefit subsidy, Section 33 pooled budgets, and Section 28 money transfers. So those are sort of those last two are sort of collaborative arrangements with the Health Board. And we also certified 2 annual returns totaling £32 million, which were the teachers' pension and national non-domestic rates returns. So we issued 1 unqualified opinion and 4 qualified opinions. Qualified opinions are not unusual when it comes to grant certification work. I should stress, I guess, that the certification requirements for each grant claim are set by the grant paying body. So, for example, for housing benefit, the DWP sets those certification instructions for us, and they're quite rigid, quite strict. I suppose they don't allow for much auditor judgment as we could sort of use on the main accounts audit. They sort of require us to report an issue, any issues regardless of value, and issue a qualified opinion. So I guess just seeing the word qualified opinion is not necessarily cause for massive alarm bells. So I really would just want to stress that. So I'll take each grant in turn and just sort of summarise the findings. So we identified 2 issues on the NNDR return. One was an issue faced with many authorities where, due to the pandemic, on-site inspections to confirm eligibility for empty property relief couldn't be completed. So as a result, some evidence was missing to support that relief. And we also identified one other instance where no evidence could be found to support the claim. However, the sample we'd looked at relating to that specific element of the claim was quite vast, and we were content that there's no systemic matter arising here. Again, then for the teacher's pension return, there was submitted evidence for a sampled item and 2 other minor issues. But as you can see, the values reported here are very low. Like I said, it's due to those certification instructions that require us to report issues and errors, kind of regardless of value, whereas we might have a trivial threshold, say, on the main accounts audit. We identified several issues with the housing benefit work. This is by far the most complex grant that we audit and where the bulk of our time is spent. So whilst the list of issues here seems quite extensive, the impact of these is relatively low. Each one has been discussed with the benefits team to make sure that they're understood and action can be taken to address them. So we identified several issues with the calculations of some income deductions, which make up part of the housing benefit payments to individuals, resulting in overpayments of subsidies. These were minor in value. I think one was around £300, another around 50. So, like I say, quite low value here. However, as set out by DWP, we had to report them. And they also require us to undertake additional sample testing next year to check that those issues have been addressed. So again, it will be us following background and following this, closing off the circle, I suppose, in relation to those issues. The remaining issues around housing benefit related to sort of administrative issues such as missing documentation, underpayments of subsidy or misclassification of items within the claim, sort of, between lines on the claim form, which had sort of a net nil impact on the claim. So we had a very good discussion with Tiana in the benefits team around these, and we're very content that there's no systemic issues or significant weaknesses in control here. Coming on then to the Section 33 pooled budget, that required an amendment to the claim, so none of the previous ones actually required any amendments to the claims, just reporting for information. But here there was an amount claimed in 2021 that actually related to 1920. The nature of this pooled budget is if you miss your window to claim funding, you can't just add it on to next year's claim. You sort of lost that opportunity. So that 1920 element had to be removed from the claim. That was around £2,000. And we also identified an overspend on the pooled budget of £17,000 where prior approval for the overspend couldn't be found and provided to us. This is likely due to partnership meetings, like many other meetings, being disrupted due to the pandemic. So again, we're not concerned that this is any significant cause for concern. Finally, there were no issues to report from the Section 28 money transfers work. The last bit of the return then sets out our fee for the past 2 years and an estimate for this year's work. So given that we've identified issues on the housing benefit over the past 2 years, we've sort of estimated next year's fee to be sort of in line with the charge over the past 2 years. However, I should stress this is just an estimate. If those issues are resolved and it costs us less to complete the work, we'll charge less. We can't make a profit. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Rachel. Questions or comments, please? Phil.
Only a quick one, Rachel. Are you generally satisfied with the standard of the reports, and are there any common or repeated issues that management should be concentrating on? Do you get any themes of errors?
I wouldn't have said there was any theme sort of emerging from one year to the next. I think housing benefit, they're very complex claims to audit, so quite often we'll come across something different from one year to the next. Just due to sort of the level of detail that we're required to go to. We've got a good working relationship with the benefits teams. And yeah, I've got no cause for concern from anything that we found last year.
Good to hear, thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ian, please.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I'm happy with a very small point. In the process of identifying some of the underpaid housing benefits, were the benefits team then alerted and able to make the correct payments to the claimants?
Yes, so we would have notified them of which claim we were looking at and the amounts involved, so they can then work it through and make any required changes. Yeah.
Thank you. Tony, next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On the NNDR, you had problems identifying what properties were empty for proper payments and proper restitution. Can that be identified in any shape or form, or is it just the fact you couldn't do it?
So it wasn't necessarily that we couldn't do it. It's to do with what the authority are required to do to verify those empty property relief claims. So, they under normal circumstances would go out and see that a property is empty, but due to the pandemic, we're unable to do that in all instances to make sure that a property was empty for the entire period being claimed. I think there were alternative sources of evidence in a number of instances that gave us sort of a satisfactory level of assurance over it. But I should stress Monmouthshire is not alone on this one. Those COVID restrictions were across Wales, so a number of authorities had this sort of point sort of noted in their qualification letters.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there here.
Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel, for this report. When I started reading this report, I was quite sort of nonplussed by seeing 4 qualified certificates out of 5, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's something seriously wrong here. And as I read on, I was equally annoyed by the small-mindedness of some of this stuff, because there is nothing of any significance here which would actually drive you into a qualification. The one adjustment of 2,700 is between a pool budget, which means a minor adjustment between us and the health board. In the macro world, the public purse is not out of pocket at all. So my question is, 4 out of 5 were qualified. So what? What's the outcome of that?
So we submit our findings to the grant paying bodies. We say, over to you, this is what we found. It's up to them then if they want to come back to the authority and take any extra action. So it's for information for the grant awarding bodies, so DWP and the Teachers Pension Agency and the like.
Do we know from previous years whether the grant awarding bodies have indeed done that?
I'm not aware of anything, but I don't know whether Peter or John are aware of anything going back further.
I'll jump in before John, but we'll probably arrive at the same point in any event. So I'm not actually aware. When with such trivial matters, it's very unusual for a funded body to actually seek actual adjustment. So yeah, it's a frustration born, I think, just in terms of that word qualification. When materiality on. It's not critique at Audit Wales. They're following the process that they've been asked to undertake, but. When you've got a zero materiality and you've got such trivial matters on grants that are for millions of pounds, put in context, I'd say that was a pretty good control environment, really, given the level of testing that's been undertaken. But there we go.
Yeah, I just to come back, I agree entirely. As an accountant, when I see qualified, I get my I'm like very nervous about it. So I guess, Rachel, what I ask is that we feed back to the grant forwarding bodies that they should perhaps think about having a minimum thresholds in there that would make this life an awful lot easier for all of us.
I can certainly feed that into our technical team, who do have regular discussions with the bodies. Yeah, no problem.
Okay, final ask. No, we're looking okay. So to summarise this item, Ben, I'm of the same view as others who've just spoken. So by means of conclusion, I think this committee can take comfort from the conclusions of Audit Wales's work, especially in relation to where you report that the Council has generally sound arrangements in place for the production and submission of its returns. But of course, this committee does note the minor technical breaches which resulted in the qualified audit opinions. And of course, note comments that others have made. So, thank you. We will then swiftly move on to item 8. Item 8 is the invitation of officers and the heads of service regarding limited opinion audit reports. In the first instance, I'll hand over to Andy Waffen, Chief Internal Auditor, to set the scene, to introduce the officers present, and then I may say a few additional words. Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you said, this is the... Okay, this is the, as the Chair said, this is the report from Internal Audit in terms of limited opinions which we've issued, and the invitation from members of the Governance and Audit Committee to a service manager and a head of service to come along today to give you an update on in progress following those limited opinions. The expectations of members following this report are either to accept the explanations and assurances that the service managers will provide you with this afternoon and are outlined in the report, and that will be verified when we actually do a follow-up internal audit report in due course, which will be included within our audit plan, probably at the latter part of this year or beginning of the next financial year. Or, if you don't accept the explanations that the managers have provided you with, to raise those concerns with the Chief Officer and possibly the Senior Leadership Team and escalate your concerns. So, as Chief Internal Auditor of Monmouthshire, and in line with the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, I have a responsibility to report all the opinions into you as a Governance and Audit Committee, good and bad, positive and unfavourable. And these two in particular were identified from my annual report for 21-22, where members of this committee were concerned that there were two limited opinions within my work programme. So of all the opinions which we issued, there were 2 limited, and as members, you felt it would be appropriate for service managers to come along and justify the reasons for that initially, and also to gain assurances. So we've invited 2 of the managers along this afternoon with the aim of providing you with an explanation of why there was a weakness in control to start with, to provide assurances on the progress of the implementation of the agreed audit recommendations in order to demonstrate an improvement of the overall control environment, and to explain why they're accepting the risk for not implementing the audit recommendation. The information for members is laid out in the appendix, and we have 2 audit jobs in front of you today. So the first will be on concessionary travel, and the second will be fleet, health and safety and driver management. I've included in the appendix a summary of our issues which we've identified, and in terms of the overall opinion, that is formed from a combination of a risk-rated weakness and strength. So if you have more weaknesses than you have strengths, then you generally get a more unfavourable audit opinion, which is the case in these 2 reports. So we identify significant, moderate and minor risks, but we also give credit for strengths in all the audit reports which we undertake. So if we can move members to page 69 of your pack, there's a table with 5 columns. The issue and risk is the internal audit issue which we identified, or the weakness which we identified at the time we undertook the audit. The recommendation is the audit recommendation to improve the control environment, and the initial management response then is the response from the manager at that particular time. In the far right-hand column, the manager has subsequently provided a response to give you assurance on the progress that has been made subsequently to move that forward. And hopefully, as I said, we'll gain and give you assurance. Chair, I'm happy to hand over initially to Richard Cook to explain his report, which is Concessionary Travel, and then we can come on to Deborah Howells to talk to the second report, if you're happy to do that.
Yeah, just to say, welcome, Richard. Thank you for attending. As Andy said, look forward to giving us an update in terms of where you are with these actions, and just give a bit more colour in terms of the nature of the apparent disagreement with Audit in respect to their findings. So, Richard, over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The report obviously is on concessionary travel, which is a Welsh Government funded scheme. Although it is a local authority scheme, it is a Welsh Government funded scheme. And during the period of the COVID pandemic, Welsh Government had agreed that operators were to be paid at pre-pandemic levels so that they had sustainability on their bus services. So obviously during the time of the audit, these hardship payments were being made to the operators. And where we are on the first audit opinion regarding the hardship payments totaling over 46k not being claimed from Welsh Government, or being claimed but not being paid out, it links into other grant funding schemes which we called BES 2 at the time, and the money that was needed to be repaid was from English operators who hadn't joined the scheme. Now what happened is that these operators were going to sign up to the BES scheme, but I believe that they're corporate operators and they basically got money from the DFT, so they weren't going to claim money from the Welsh Government. But we put this down on our claim form simply because it was coming to the end of the financial year and we had to put that in. We then subsequently put a sub in for that, so we had a subsidy in for 21-22, but of course we still didn't know whether they were going to sign up to this, and they decided that they wouldn't. So at the end of the financial year, as we always do, when these returns are put back to Welsh Government, we repaid that money to the Welsh Government. So that money has been repaid in full. we won't have this problem again, because now from the 1st of August this year, they've all gone back to actual claims and not to historical claims. So that number one, actually, as I said, it had been managed anyway, because we had, accrued the money ready for this financial year, and now it has been paid back, into Welsh Government at Q4. So if I move on to the second one, this is an inherent problem we've had with Welsh Government around the signing of the forms, and it is an issue that we have to send the quarterly returns into Welsh Government at the end of every quarter, and they give us until the 20th of the following month to send those returns in, which doesn't give anybody a lot of time to receive the details from the operators and to send those back in. Now, what obviously on the audit report, they said that they were obviously submitted without the approval of the 151 officer, which is correct. But what these were draft reports, which we send to Welsh Government, and then they are obviously checked through the audit process of checking with the finance team to make sure that the ledger agrees to the return, and then they can be signed by the 151 officer. Now, I spoke to Welsh Government regarding this because this was something that the Wales Audit Office had introduced a number of years ago. It only used to be the final return that was put back to Welsh Government that would have been signed by the 151 officer. The quarterly returns were signed by a head of service. But they changed this on an audit recommendation a number of years ago, but obviously the practicalities around it I don't think they really realised. So I've got an email that came from Welsh Government explaining why this is the issue. So what it says is, in terms of the 20th day following the end of the quarter for submitting concessionary fair claim forms, this was picked as being the date that around half of authorities could submit either a final or a draft version of the claim form. So what they're saying is that all authorities don't get the claim in by the 20th, around half do currently. So we understand that depending on operators submitting their invoices can impact on when an authority can submit a final signed version to us. And from our perspective, we are keen to receive either a draft or a finalised claim form as soon as possible on or around the 20th day in order for us to update our forecast and to organise a drawdown of funds from the Treasury to make the reimbursement payments to the local authorities. However, payments can only be made on finalised claims cleared by your Section 151 officer. As a consequence of COVID and people working from home, we will accept an email authorisation from the Section 151 officer in lieu of a signed form, as we understand the complications of getting this done under home working scenarios. There is another part to that, but that's for the next item. So basically with this, the issue we have with getting the invoices in from the operators is they're corporate operators. They give us the information from their ticket machine so we can fill the claim forms in, but the invoices come from a central point in Stockport and they take some time to arrive here. They then have to go through all our invoicing processes to get onto our ledger. So that is why it takes a number of weeks to get that in place. So if I move down to number 3, so the grant terms and conditions letters are not received by the grant administrator and finance until halfway through the grant period. Again, another inherent problem we've got from Welsh Government. This is not within our gift of, having this at the actual date it should be here. It didn't used to be a problem, but for the last, I don't know how many years, probably 6 or 7 years, this has been an inherent problem because of the problems that with Welsh Government in getting the grant letter sent to us and signed. Now, again, the response from Welsh Government we've had on this is, in terms of the grant award letters being late, that is purely down to Welsh Government and our internal sign-off processes. The 2022-23 concessionary fares and bus services support grant award letters have now been cleared and are currently being signed off with the aim of sending them out before the end of the week. This email was dated the 30th of August, and it's from the Welsh Government officer who deals with these concessionary fare grants and BSSG. We have had the concessionary fare letter now in September, but we're still waiting for the bus services support grant letter. So you can see the inherent problem that we've got. The procedure-wise, we do chase them all the time to ask them to ensure that we get these grant award letters through in a timely fashion, but every year we have the same problem. I think it has to go through about 4 or 5 different departments within Welsh Government to be signed off before we receive it. Any changes in the terms and conditions of the grant award letter, for us to make any changes, we have to give operators 4 months' notice anyway. So, that isn't an issue with us because we have to give them 4 months' notice of any change anyway. So, item 4, there were no specific internal guidance documents and procedures to ensure that the scheme was administered in line with Welsh Government expectations, particularly should one of the officers be off or ill or something, and we completely agree that's something that we are in the process of putting in place, and that will be in place very shortly.
Sorry, Richard, when you say shortly, how shortly, please?
I would say within the next month at the latest.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Some operators were submitting claims which had not been supported with smart card data to substantiate more than 98% of their claim. This is item 5. Now, there was a problem with 2 operators that we had, which was Newport Bus and Monmouthshire's School and Community Transport section, who didn't have the ticket machine data, which it has to be up to 98%, is shown, the cards have been swiped on the ticket machines. The reason for that is they were in the process of transition. Newport Bus were changing from Wayfarer machines to ticketed machines, and also were the Monmouthshire School and Community Transport section. That has now been rectified. They both have ticket machines, and the ticket machine data comes back over 98%. So we haven't got an issue with that any longer. The other part of this is that we have some English operators that come into Wales, Stagecoach West, Lydney Dialer Ride and a few others who come into Wales, and none of their ticket machines are compatible with Welsh smart card data. So we can't get the smart card data from any of the English operators, and Welsh Government are aware of this, and obviously they agree that we have a spreadsheet from the company rather than having the smart card machine data. Item 6 is dates for submission of claims from operators have not been set. Again, we agree we will set dates for them to submit the claims, which we've done already. But of course, it is up to the operators to ensure they're here. We chase them, but a lot of these invoices come from central points. So although we chase the local company, they chase in their invoicing section. It is done in Stockport, and we do have to wait for that to come through. And it does take a number of weeks before we get that. There are also some very, very small CT operators who run with voluntary staff, and we have to wait until that volunteer is there for them to fill in the claim form. Item 7, monthly reports are available to help identify potential fraudulent behaviour. However, these are unable to be used at present. There's been a problem since the supplier, Welsh Government supplier, changed from ACT. They were taken over by a company called Fujitsu, and ever since that has happened, they come in a different format, in a zip file, and we're not able to open the zip files to find the reports. This is something that we've taken up with SRS and with Fujitsu, and we're working with them currently to make sure that we can get these reports open, and we're able to work on the data within those reports. What those reports show is how many people have used their cards over 10 times or used them very frequently in a short space of time, so that we're able to check to make sure that that is correct. And then we can also do some monitoring on the vehicles with that. But that is something that we are working. We're looking to resolve that before the end of November. There is some issue with it, but it is being worked on at the moment.
Sorry, Richard, before moving on, maybe I'll express some surprise that you're unable to open zip files in the authority. That sounds quite strange. Hopefully you can resolve it. PDQ.
It is not. I think it's not only us, it's a number of other authorities as well who are having the problem, but it's something to do with the way they're sent, and I presume it's to do with the firewalls that we have, that they were not allowing us to open them. But we're trying to work with SRS to make sure that we're able to open those in the future.
Good luck with that. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks very much. Item 8, the authority doesn't have a programme in place for inspectors to board vehicles which are used to carry concessionary passengers. Again, this is down to resource, and we are working on that to make sure that we can do it. The officer who is obviously doing all this work is on his own at the moment, and we do need to address the issue around the number of resources that we have. The team has moved over now to Deb, and I think Deb is going to address that within the new structures. But, as soon as we have that resource, then we will resume those checks. He is going to try and, resume those checks as soon as possible, but, that's obviously down to workload, but it is something that we do need to do. Item 9. Minor errors were identified in 2 of the historic figures used in the 21-22 Q1 BES 2 calculations. Incorrect payments made. That's been resolved, and we've rectified that. There were small errors, but they have been rectified. It was just the figures were round the wrong way, basically. But that has been rectified. And number 10, overall claim balances relating to the first 2 quarters of 2021 had not been settled or recorded in the financial ledger system. What happened here? Payments were changed by Welsh Government. During COVID, we were given interim payments to the authorities to make sure there was cash flow. So they were reconciled then at the year end. So when they checked Q1 and Q2, they wouldn't have been reconciled at that point. So obviously, when we come to year end, then that will be reconciled. But it was just a change in the system from Welsh Government, where they used to pay quarterly in arrears. They gave us upfront payments, so we had cash flow during COVID. And I think that is all of the recommendations. Yeah,
I think you're right. So thank you. Very helpful context. I note the dependency on a couple of external third parties, which has sort of had some adverse impact on the ability to meet some of the audit recommendations. So, questions and comments from members, please. I'll go to Tony first.
Hello, Richard. Long time no see. Point 8, regarding the potential for operators to fiddle the system. Is this a knowledgeable bit of information, and is it worthwhile appointing somebody to monitor this, which would be more cost effective?
Yeah, it is good information when, we've had the information before, and we did actually catch an operator who had swiped a card, or had a driver who swiped the card on about 40 odd occasions during 1 or 2 trips. So we did catch them. That was taken forward by Welsh Government, but it is something that we do really need to carry out, but those reports obviously are crucial to make sure that we can do that. Thanks.
Phil, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Rich, there was one point that you raised. I'd like to think it was a minor point, but I'm going to ask it anyway. On item 3 of the one of the second lot of reports, letters to the chief executive. Surely, I mean, I'm sure Paul isn't sat on them for any length of time, but it just seems strange to me that we've got to go around the houses to get it. It's bound to be causing some sort of delay. And my second question was the audit opinions sort of frightened us a bit, when you read the management responses, that puts it into far better context. I understand why those opinions were given, but also understand the rationale that you're working with. But the thing that I'd like to some comfort on is, are you still able to make progress? You're clearly making progress on these items, or is there something that's really seen as a brick wall that's going to prevent you from doing what you want to do?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Murphy. It's on the number 3 with the Chief Executive, we have asked Welsh Government to send them to the officers involved as well to ensure that we've got them. They did that this time, but they have said in the past that they sent them out to the chief executives, and the chief executives haven't had them. So whether they have different addresses or something, I don't know, but we do have an inherent problem in getting stuff from Welsh Government.
It's an automatic built-in excuse, isn't it?
Yeah. It is something that is difficult to manage, because the thing with concessionary fares is it's obviously a rollover grant as well, because at the end of the financial year you're claiming money retrospectively in the following financial year for the last quarter. So we have to have all that data in, it has to be signed off, it has to be checked, and that's something that it takes a process and takes time. So trying to meet the 20th of the month is virtually impossible, and I think obviously with the response from Welsh Government that they realise that as well, but all they want is a draft version of that going in with no signatures on, which is what we are we're now doing. And obviously then we wouldn't expect the 151 officer to sign it off unless he's certain that everything has been checked. And for me, I think we do work quite closely with Welsh Government. I especially work, quite a bit with them on different things, and we try and improve the processes. And I think, this is something that we do need to take up with them really around that, date for the submissions to go back maybe needs to be made a little bit longer, so that we have that time in it and get those, able to get those signed off before they go back in.
But overall, is there anything causing you difficulty, or are you relatively content with the way it's going?
No, there's no real difficulty in doing it. It's just a case of having the time to be able to fill those forms in and send them back and getting the information from the operators. That's the thing that takes the time, really. Thanks.
Okay, Andy Waffen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just on part 3, just to follow up on the Councillor's comments, there's a second part to that in terms of the formal acceptance of grant and not being returned to Welsh Government by the 21-day deadline. Richard, can you just give the committee assurance that that is now improved and you will meet the deadline moving forward?
Yes, I mean the problem we have with this obviously is that it's finding the form in the first place, because over the number of years they've said they sent it out and it hasn't gone back in. But we are, as I said, we've now asked for it to go to the officers so they can ensure that it gets signed off within that 21-day deadline, so that the form comes through at the officers can then send it to the relevant officers and make sure that they get it back and send it back to them within that deadline.
Chair, if I can just add there as well, is this an annual claim you're claiming from Welsh Government, Rich? So you would know when to expect it every year?
It's a quarterly claim. We do 4 quarterly claims, Andrew, and but it's an annual grant, if you know what I mean. So there's an annual pot of money there for concessionary fares. The authority puts money into concessionary fares as well. I think we put £284,000 of our own authority money into concessionary fares, and obviously that's taken off the grant when it's paid out. So those figures that go into Welsh Government are the excess that we claim from Welsh Government. But the grant award letters, as I said, it has been an issue with Welsh Government in getting them through to us in the first place. But as I said, we have now asked the officer in Welsh Government to send them direct to the officer to ensure that they get signed in time.
Thank you, Chair. It's only a quick point, really, given the fact that it's my signature that ends up going on these. So, you're clearly being proactive there, Richard, to obviously get that remedied. It's an unusual situation, actually, for a claim form to make its way simply into a chief executive and not other relevant designated officers to be identified up front, who also get a copy similarly alongside. But any problems in the near term in getting that resolved, let me know, and I'll speak to the necessary officials in Welsh Government to make sure that is quickly rectified here. Thanks.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks for the explanations about some of this. Has been quite helpful, the conversation. Overall, I'm kind of frustrated by some of this because the lack of clarity over whether the recommendations are accepted or not up front would be helpful. Understanding whether third parties involved would be helpful as well, because some of these management responses appear to be not in the gift of this organisation to fix, and that needs to be perhaps a little bit clearer in some of this. But some of this is quite processy, and we need to, if there are a set of rules, we need to make best efforts to follow the set of rules. The last item we talked about grant reports, and they were really small points in that, but this is in a similar ballpark. There's a set of rules you have to follow to get the money out of Welsh Government, and we run the risk of not getting that money out of the Welsh Government, I guess. So I guess my question is to Andrew, I suppose, more than anywhere else. If you were to do this report in all the other local authorities, would you get the same answer?
That's very difficult for me to confirm or challenge, really, because we don't know what the systems are like in the other process, in the other authorities.
That's probably exactly my point then. If other authorities can get it right, why can't we?
I don't know. I don't know how other authorities are doing it. I don't know how many other authorities are receiving bus grants, but they would be in a similar position. They need to comply with the terms and conditions of Welsh Government, the policies and procedures, etc. And if their auditors are auditing their claim and their processes, they would provide a similar report to me. But just to clarify that a little bit, in terms of how we've arrived at this audit report, is that we identify the expected controls which should be in place for this particular process, concessionary travel. That's primarily the procedures from Welsh Government. Are they being complied with? We agree that scope with the service manager to make sure we're on the right lines, and we then expect that service manager to provide us with the appropriate information to enable us to audit against those procedures and policies. So that's what we've done. We've gone through that process. We've identified some strengths. We've identified some weaknesses. In this particular circumstance, the weaknesses far outweigh the strengths, and hence the unfavourable limited opinion. But in terms of the comparison, some obviously do, some obviously don't. I mean, I think Richard referred to half do get their claims in on time. So there would be a difference of opinion.
Okay, thank you. So we've heard Richard's explanation in terms of the current situation. We've also had some feedback from officers via sort of Andy Woffin, Peter Davis and others in relation to the situation. So what's our collective view as a committee? Are we content with the explanations given, or do we require this matter to be escalated? Phil?
I'm content, Chair.
Does anyone have a contrary view? Tony, please.
Yeah, I think that we now come to the end of this financial year. Perhaps in the middle of the next financial year, we can have a review of the processes that are in place, how they can be changed, how they can be improved. Does that make sense, Richard?
Andy Waffen, please.
Thanks, Chair. And in our normal course of events, we would follow up a limited opinion. Because there was a delay in finalising this particular report, it's not included in the 22-23 audit plan, but we'll include it in the Q1 for 23-24 to do a follow-up review to make sure that the recommendations have been acted upon and there are improvements in the system, and we'll report back to committee accordingly.
Thank you. Okay, to summarise this audit item then, say once again, thank you, Richard, for attending. Your commentary was very, very helpful. We do note there's some continuing control weaknesses, but we understand the wider situation and why they are what they are, and look forward to Andy Waffen's follow-up in due course. So Andy, if you could just introduce the next element, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is now in relation to the fleet health and safety and driver management audit which we undertook. It was finalised during 21-22 and did come with a limited opinion. On page 79 of your pack, there's a table of the significant issues we identified, the moderate issues, the minor, and also the strengths which we identified as part of that process. We've invited, members have invited Debbie Howells along, who's the head of service, to talk through and give the same assurances as Richard has in the previous report. I'll hand over to Deb, thanks.
Okay, just say welcome, Deborah. So thank you for attending, and please, over to you.
Thank you. You'll note that there are a number of recommendations here, and you will also note that in terms of the context of this report, that some of those recommendations were not agreed at the time of the report. So I think it's probably a bit helpful for me to explain why that was the position at the time. So at the time of the report, all budgets relating to fleet and the management thereof, in terms of how drivers undertake their duties, etc., was devolved down into individual service areas. However, this report sought to make recommendations and find failures against the fleet team, where I contend and my colleagues contend they had no levers at that time to make the adjustments that were proposed. So if we look at Action 1 or Recommendation 1, the recommendation was that we should work towards centralising the management of health and safety and driver management. Completely and utterly endorse that opinion, and we've now worked very much to actually doing that in September, as in last month. Budgets have now been centralised in the fleet team, and we are now in a position where we can start to apply the levers that we didn't previously have. So whilst we absolutely agreed with the recommendation in terms of there should be a central approach to fleet, it wasn't within fleet's gift to actually achieve that at the time. You'll note in the progress to date, I've also put additional information around. We now have information sent to us via the new starter form. So when a new starter applies to, is granted a role in Monmouthshire now that requires them to drive, we now automatically get that information fed through to the transport team. We now have an accident investigation and training officer who actually undertakes driver induction, and we will assess their ability to undertake that role. Similarly, when there are terminations, we also get notified of those. We are also working on some documents which are picked up later on in the recommendations, but we believe we've started to make good progress now that we've started to aggregate those budgets, and we've also been able to appoint an additional member of staff in the accident and re-investigation individual, and also we're currently out for a utilisation officer. In terms of recommendation 2, there was quite rightly picked up that there was a lack of policies and procedures in place. We've been working on the development of those policies and procedures. Some of them lie within fleet to deliver, one of them doesn't, which is the drug and alcohol testing, and that's being picked up by the training manager, who is now working on that policy. In terms of the driver's handbook, we have a draft policy that's ready to go out in terms of consultation. We've also developed a policy regarding the use of the trackers in our vehicles. That was consulted upon back in May, and we're still working our way through that consultation process. We're hoping to go into the joint advisory group with our trade union colleagues in November, which will then enable that policy to be adopted. In terms of training documentation, I go back to the context at the time. We didn't have the records of all the individual service areas. We now keep the records of all the training that we've undertaken. We hold that locally at the moment in a spreadsheet. As soon as the new training software portal has been rolled out, that information will be put across and inputted into that training portal. We do keep records of any training that we provide around CPC, so any HGV driver or any passenger transport driver is required to undertake 35 hours of training within a 5-year period. That's held by passenger transport by the Schools and Communities Transport Manager, and for large good vehicles it's now held by the Transport Manager who looks after fleet. So we have made progress in terms of that. We still will not hold individual records in terms of things like chainsaw training or anything like that is specific to their job and is local to the service that they're employed in. But we would expect those managers, as soon as that training system is rolled out, to input that data in there. In terms of accident policy, at the time that this report was undertaken, accident reporting was managed by the insurance team and they had a procedure in place. We were not always notified of accidents. We now have a completely different procedure in place as a result of the aggregation into the fleet team. That individual now has changed the process, has actually notified all of the managers who have responsibility for vehicles or drivers, and all accidents must be reported to the Accident Investigation and Training Officer. He will then go out and undertake an investigation, and if necessary, then we will undertake additional training, or if needs be, disciplinary action, if that's what's required. But we have completely changed that accident procedure. In terms of number 5, the vehicle trackers, as I mentioned earlier, we've actually developed a tracker policy that has been consulted upon with all service managers. We have consulted upon it with trade unions, but we need to wait for that formal meeting in November in order for us to get final approval to implement that policy. The tracker system is, we put a tracker on every vehicle. We utilise that data for establishing the utilisation of the vehicles to enable us, hopefully, to start reducing the fleet that we have. Particularly important as part of our decarbonisation agenda, because we'll start to identify the routes where people are going, whether there is opportunity to share vehicles, and also in terms of what vehicles, which are the best vehicles out there, potentially electric, potentially hydrogen, as I said, or do we even need that vehicle in the first place? It also helps us in terms of any queries that we get from members of the public where they make reference to potentially seeing one of our drivers, they think they were travelling at excess speed. We're able to establish whether that's correct or not from that tracker system, and it is used to support investigations into potential disciplinaries. In terms of the Quartix, which is number 6, that is our tracker system. We have now implemented a new procedure. As I said, we now get notified of new starters, we get notified of terminations, and we track that system on a quarterly basis now to make sure that those people who have access to the Quartix system should have access to the Quartix system. Anyone who doesn't need it will be removed from that list. In terms of number 7, policy on speeding, that's contained within our tracker policy. It's also contained within our new handbooks, which will be going out shortly, where we provide specific details on how we will utilise the tracker information and also the expectations of drivers and their managers in ensuring compliance, not just with speeding, but all other parts of the highways code and legislation, for instance, loading and unloading, and making sure that's being done, observing payload requirements on vehicles, etc. And I think actually that was the last one. So hopefully I provided you with some context in terms of where we were at that time and where we are now. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you, Deborah. Okay, questions and comments? Go to Tony first, please.
Thank you, Deb, for your report. What is the criteria on drug and alcohol policy? And what is the criteria on speeding, which is obviously, speeding would be retrospective, wouldn't it, based on information from a tracker. But drug and alcohol policy, would that be live at your base, for example? And how would it be applied within the laws, you might say?
So the drug and alcohol policy has not been developed by the transport team. That's been developed corporately by colleagues there, and they have yet to finalise how that will look.
Yeah.
So I can't provide you with any additional information on that at the moment.
All
I
right.
would anticipate that it would be done at the base if there was cause for concern. So if
that's the point.
what I
What's the
would
cause? Yeah,
anticipate
okay.
it to look like. In terms of speeding, anyone who's driving a large good vehicle or a PSV, public passenger service vehicle, because we are running those under operating licences, we have an obligation to report any speeding incidences to the Traffic Commissioner, who have responsibility for PSV and LGV vehicles. We wouldn't take action necessary ourselves until such time. We would ask our service managers to make sure all of the colleagues are aware of the speed limits, make sure that they're driving in accordance with those speed limits, and we would use our tracking data once the policy is approved to support any investigations. As soon as the driver's handbook policy is approved, again, we would use that potentially to help, support, inform in the first instance, and if we then found repeat incidences, then we'd be looking to use that to support, if necessary, disciplinary action against individuals who are persistent offenders.
So, retrospective speeding records, are they admissible to other authorities? And what would our authority do in terms of retrospective? You know, you've got a tracker of the speed.
Yes.
It's not live speed. It's not picked up by the appropriate authorities. How would that apply to the person's employment?
So as perhaps
Am I getting complicated?
the tracking data is obviously live,
Yeah.
but someone will need to review that tracking data.
Right, okay.
So we wouldn't automatically have a system that alerted us that there was a person out there driving a vehicle in excess of the speed limits as it stood. We would rely on a hopefully new officer that will be coming in post to be actually undertaking checks against those tracker systems and then advising their individual managers that there are individuals who are exceeding the speed limit.
So you'd be tracking all operators' activities then live?
We
You
don't
could.
do that. We could do that now if we so wished, because the tracker data is live, but we don't do that. We don't have the resources to do that. But we use that tracking data more at this moment, to inform us in terms of the utilisation of the vehicles rather than the driver behaviour in that vehicle.
So what would your response be to the employer then? Employee, your drivers. How would your data, how would your follow-up apply to an employee's employment, put it that way?
So in the tracker policy, we have been clear that we will use the tracker data, if necessary, to support investigations into poor driver behaviour.
So it's pretty prescriptive then?
So if it became evident that we had an individual that was exceeding the speed limit frequently, in the first instance we'd expect their line manager or our colleagues to have a conversation with them to remind them of their obligations. If, however, that behaviour continued to persist and we were asked to provide that information to support another service area in terms of a disciplinary, if the tracker policy is approved, when it goes in front of JAG, then we would use that data to support those investigations.
So it's very similar to insurance companies' tracking policy, where youngsters just pass their test, have a tracker on to keep their driving under control, you might say.
Yeah, but to be clear, that's not, the tracker is there not just to keep drivers under control. That wasn't the
wrong word. I used the wrong word there.
But that information can be there used to not only support investigations, but also to safeguard drivers when we do have complaints from members of the public.
Right, okay.
And we have used that to if there is an accident, etc., we have been able to prove that actually the information that the member of the public might consider to be correct was not.
Okay.
So our drivers were not speeding, or they did not cause the accident.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think Phil next. Did you want to ask a question, Phil?
Yeah, just a quick one. I mean, I'm aware of all the issues for a long period and how you've been battling with them. So my question is the same one I asked of Richard, really. Do you see any sort of major hurdle which is preventing you from making progress, or are you happy with the progress being made?
I think with the support of Peter Davies and colleagues, the actual centralisation of the budget has enabled us to move forward at a significant pace. So my thanks go to those colleagues actually, because that has enabled us to move on in the same direction that Audit identified with the weaknesses. We're now starting, hopefully, to transfer those into strengths. There are still hurdles for us to overcome in terms of making sure that these new policies and procedures get approval in the JAG groups with the staff representatives, and as soon as those are in place, that will enable us then to utilise that data more effectively, not just in investigations that we've just been talking about, but more importantly around our transition to net zero vehicles and reducing financial consequences. There are no pointers holding multiple vehicles if they're not being fully utilised, and we could be sharing them. So no, Phil, at this moment in time, as long as the other issues get resolved in the joint advisory group, sorry, Councillor Murphy, then no.
So you can copy that as well. All right, thanks for that, Dan.
Okay, Colin, please.
Hi, Deborah. I was just going to ask, a lot of your explanations there seem to relate to devolved, I think, which you're alluding to there, devolved areas of fleet. So what's the shape of your team now? Have you had a review of, is it a different shaped team? How does it look?
So the team now is, we still have the transport manager. Previously we had 2 individuals that sat underneath that transport manager. We've now got the accident reporting person in place, and we've also got another rollout, which is the utilisation. So we've grown the team by 2, which will help us to manage that. I think the biggest benefit to us has been the addition so far of the accident training officer, who actually is a qualified mechanic as well. So he is able now, when we have new starters, to assess their driving. He's able to provide guidance to service areas as to what vehicles they should or shouldn't be driving. He's also helping in terms of which vehicles are suitable to go along which routes in order to hopefully to reduce those accidents as well. And when we get the utilisation officer, that officer then will be able, as I said, to provide us with that more informed evidence-based data for us to support service areas in terms of when they're looking to acquire new vehicles. Do they need them? If they do, is it the vehicle that they're asking for the right vehicle, or can we do things differently? So I am far more comfortable with the direction of travel that we are now on.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, let me just check. Randy Woffin, do you want to make any comments at this stage?
Only to say, Chair, that was comprehensive feedback from Deb in terms of the issues we identified at the audit. Hopefully you've got assurance that things have improved and are moving forward. This particular follow-up review is included in our audit plan for 22-23, so we'll be undertaking that in Q2, Q4, and we'll be reporting back accordingly in due course with a hopefully more positive audit opinion.
Good, thank you. Let me check with members. Are we content with the explanations given? I see lots of nods, so good. Let's assume conclude we are content. And Deborah, thank you for attending. Thank you for the very helpful and comprehensive update. Okay, let's move on to item 9. Item 9 is the Audit Wales Work Programme Council update. This agenda item is an update on the Council's progress against the Audit Wales Work Programme, and we're being asked to seek assurance that the progress being made is adequate and or to refer relevant issues to other committees. Paper's been introduced by Richard Jones, Performance and Data Insights Manager. So Richard, please assume we've read the paper, but pull out key matters of note. Over to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The report, as you already described, updates on the Audit Wales work programme. You've received from Audit Wales their work programme and their quarterly progress. This report sets out how the Council is responding to those and continues to track our response to their relevant recommendations, both in local reports and in national audit reports. The report includes an update on progress against existing recommendations, and those are contained in Appendix 1. These are the Financial Sustainability Assessment, which we've already mentioned today as part of the earlier item, and also the Springing Forward report, which was provided to the committee at this last meeting. Recommendations that require further response are marked as open, and where a recommendation to be assessed has been adequately addressed, it's marked as closed, and those are contained within Appendix 3, and there's one of those in the report for you today. As well as the local work at each council, Audit Wales also carry out national studies across the local government sector, and Appendix 2 identifies those studies that have been published since this last report was brought to the committee in February, and it also provides an outline of the response from the service area who've received the report. As you've already said, Chair, the committee has a role in ensuring the council is responding to the findings and can also refer them to other committees, particularly for the national studies, if you feel the report requires further in-depth consideration for the council beyond the response already provided you by the responsible service area. And also just to reiterate that Audit Wales, as part of their ongoing annual audit work programme, may follow up on any of the open or recently closed recommendations or reports. So that gives you a background on what's involved, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Richard. So, questions or comments, please? Okay, right. Okay, so that you may have got off lightly, Richard, but let me make a few comments. So, given the current financial position, it's even more important that, the officers strengthen key elements of the MTFP process, as alluded to in the papers. As papers suggest again, the MTFP needs to be based on a range of plausible scenarios and subject to stress scenario testing, in my view. I would go on to say that this committee, in my estimation, doesn't have sufficient visibility over the end-to-end MTFP process, nor an understanding of the key financial and operational assumptions underpinning the plan. And just for members to note, I will look to pick this up with officers when I meet with them next week. Also, in regards to the proposed savings that need to be made over the period in order to deliver a balanced budget. Yet again, from this committee's perspective, I think it's essential that we understand where these cost savings are being made to gain assurance from officers that this does not materially impact levels of internal control, governance, or other matters which appear on our work programme. And yet again, I'll pick that up initially with Peter Davis, Deputy Chief Exec, but I will look to bring that back to the committee in due course. Subject to any final comments, I'll just summarise this item. But Peter, beg your pardon, Peter, please come in.
Yeah, just one hopefully constructive input just on the basis of your comments there, Chair. Just been having some exchanges with the Chief Executive just to sort of throw a few things coming up back and forth just in terms of giving the levels of reassurance, I guess, to the Governance and Audit Committee around that point around the budget process. So, as things stood, and we introduced this, as Councillor Murphy will recollect, last year, we brought my responsible financial officer opinion, which is a requirement of Section 1, being Section 151 officer of the Council. We brought that statement through the committee ahead of the budget being approved, so that the committee could reassure itself of my statement on the robustness of the budget process and the adequacy of reserves. I think if you were minded and the committee's minded to want to strengthen that, then there's probably two further opportunities. One, I think as I alluded to earlier, we are bringing a report through Cabinet on the 9th of November. So I appreciate the committee would see sight of this retrospectively at its next meeting, but that report does provide not just context, but it provides an outline of the budget process. So that might be of use to the committee as we work our way through the real-time sort of budget process. The second one is to the points made, has been touched on in the conversations today, the recommendation around the medium-term financial strategy and plan. That will either come through Cabinet or Council as appropriate. I need some constitutional advice just in terms of that either coming through Cabinet or Council in December or January. So I think possibly even in its draft form, depending on the timings of the Governance and Audit Committee meeting, we could look to possibly bring that through this committee. That might make sense.
Thank you. Any views on what Peter's set out there, please? Phil?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, that would all help. It's very difficult if we're drilling down to measures being taken to close budget gaps or anticipate what's coming up in the next 4 years. I would suggest it would be pretty difficult in this committee to do that. I think it's something we ought to recommend all of the other scrutiny committees to look at, probably on an ongoing basis. At the moment, chief officers are looking at just how they're going to cope with their current underspends. How much of that can be projected forward would be something that I think the other scrutiny committees would have more time to dig into. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't, but I think that's probably a way forward on it. I don't know. I'll take Peter's view on it.
Yeah. So again, I think it's just important and I think this is helpful just in the knowledge build for the committee, and it's a dialogue that myself and the chair have been having, and we've got a call on Monday and with Andrew around the terms of reference, scope of the committee, etc. But I think it's just important to draw this point out, this distinction between the role of particularly the Performance and Overview Committee in terms of scrutinising what will be the draft budget proposals, because that is the appropriate scrutiny committee to undertake that, and in effect matters of good control and process, which is a matter for the Governance and Audit Committee. So when we talk about the budget process, that's where the line, that's where Governance and Audit Committee's focus needs to be on ensuring itself. The means by which savings are identified, how, for example, risk and consequence are, assessed as a result of that, and, sustainability in terms of over the medium term. So, there's some discrete elements that fall to this committee. Others, to your point, Councillor Murphy, are matters for the Performance and Overview Scrutiny Committee.
So just to echo his points, thank you, Peter. Yeah, so what I referred to earlier was really understanding the risks and consequences of particular service managers making those decisions in terms of cost savings. I think we have a legitimate view on that. And I would look also to Andy Waffen as Chief Internal Auditor to take a view on those savings as well, to ensure they don't materially and adversely impact elements of control across the organisation. So that's where I'm coming from. But clearly, as Peter's alluded to, we'll work our way through that because we don't want to duplicate the work of the scrutiny committees. We very much want to complement their work, and for me that's essential. But given the challenges that Peter's very clearly outlined, I think this committee has a very important role to play in terms of helping the authority navigate its way through those challenges in relation to our particular focus in terms of reference. Before I move on, I'm going to just check finally any final questions or comments. Martin, please.
Thank you, Chair. The second part of the paper talks about national studies, and one of them is about responding to net zero. Again, just understanding where that sits in the scrutiny process. Is that performance and overview? I think this committee needs to have a view on some of that stuff, but again, recognising the last conversation about how we complement and rather than step on the toes of any other committees, I might be looking in that area.
Just to spark Deb's interest at the front there. So Deb, I don't know whether you can clarify just to the point that Martin's just highlighted, just in terms of decarbonisation efforts, the Climate Emergency Strategy Action Plan falls to performance and overview scrutiny, or?
I would have thought so, yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think we've touched on today matters of the process in terms of the reports that have been brought forward by Audit Wales, and rightly things that are for this committee to get assurance on. But in terms of the delivery element, it's very much for scrutiny, I guess, to assure itself on progress. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'll look to conclude this item by saying we've carefully review the progress being made in addressing the points raised by Audit Wales and are generally satisfied with the current position, noting the comments made by members. Okay, let's move on to item 10. Item 10 being the forward work plan. This is largely for information, but very happy to take any comments from members at this stage. Tony, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a rather lumpy agenda, 10 items. What can I say other than the fact it's a lumpy agenda? So I think the Chair may make a comment, I don't know. But
Peter, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'll just make one comment. I'm not trying to necessarily throw a curveball if in fact our colleagues from Audit Wales are still with us on the call. They may have departed, I'm not sure.
I think Charlotte's still here.
Yeah, Charlotte. So I know this is something that you probably got in train at the moment, but I am aware through my networks that there is some potential risk in terms of the closure of the audit process on the accounts from being finalised sufficient to allow us to get this through the committee as planned in November. I know that there is, SIPFA was consulting its members on and local authorities just in terms of infrastructure assets, and I know that the FRAB, the Financial Reporting Advisory Board, has just drawn some conclusion which is not entirely helpful. Yeah, I think there's matters, as I understand, that Audit Wales and Welsh Government need to work through, and that might impact on the audit process. I'm not sure if you're cited on that yet, Charlotte, but I'm just mentioning it really just as a point of reference, because I guess, Chair, we may need to provide you some update as we work our way towards November. It may have an effect.
I'm not fully aware of the situation. I don't work in financial audit, but yeah, through hearsay, I am hearing that there are issues potentially. What I will do is speak to Rachel after this meeting and get her to drop you an update on where things are. But certainly the last I heard a couple of weeks ago that there was going to be potential delays across all councils, but waiting for some resolution on this issue.
Thank you. Andy Waffen, please.
Thanks, Chair. For your March committee meeting, there's a report from me, Internal Audit Progress Report, Q3. If you're happy, Chair, I'd like to move that to the February meeting so I can give you more timely information about the progress of the plan.
Of course, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Nope, I'm not seeing any. Okay, let's move on to the minutes then. And in our traditional way, let's turn the pages on the minutes, ideally just picking up any matters of factual accuracy, any queries, concerns and matters arising. So I'll start on page 101 in your meeting pack. Please stop me as I'll move through this quickly. 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108. So, Wendy, an excellent set of minutes as usual, as I've come to expect. Thank you. Could we have someone, Martin, please?
Just to check, the agenda here says to confirm minutes. Are we actually, what does that word actually mean? Are we approving? Or are we noting? Are we just checking for accuracy? What exactly are we doing?
Good question. I've assumed you're approving it. Wendy, please help us out.
Yeah, it's confirming that it's a true record of the meeting, if you're happy to do that.
So I call that approve in all money, I guess. We're agreeing them.
We can change it to approve, I don't mind.
Yes, okay, so confirms one of those Weasley words. Yes, that we're approving these minutes. So let's assume we are going to have someone to propose and second. So someone to propose, Pete Strong, someone to second, Martin Veal. Okay, thank you. So that's all agreed. Final item, note of date of next meeting, 24th of November at 2 p.m. Thank you for your contribution, especially those in the Council Chamber, those online, and look to talk to you next in November. Thank you once again.